Have you ever wondered how your sales performance compares against your competitors and peers? The B2B Sales Benchmark Report provides the definitive guide to what success looks like in 2021. See how you compare in terms of win rate, sales cycle, average deal value, relationships, and engagement. You can see the results and get the full report at ebster.com/B2B-sales-benchmarks. This is Sales Ops Demystified, the #1 most downloaded podcast in sales operations. We invite the brightest minds in sales operations onto the show to deconstruct the why, what, and how behind rep productivity, forecasting, metrics, and all things revenue. This podcast is brought to you by Ebster, the leading customer engagement platform for Salesforce. Hello and welcome to another very special episode of the Sales Ops Demystified podcast. We are joined by Marissa White, who is currently the Director of Revenue Operations at Perkbox, that has approximately 12 years in the sales ops game. Previously has sales experience and also worked at Accenture, where I used to work. And also in the last 3 or 4 years has built up her own kind of sales operations, almost practice and media site. So Marissa, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Tom.
So let's kick off right away. Those 12 years ago, how did you initially get into sales operations?
So my story is a bit of the business trip that never ended. So I was at the time working for Accenture, and I was working on a project with some sales organizations amongst some other. And we finished the project. It was all great. I was living in the States, and I was being told that the client needed some more support. They'd had someone go off who was kind of working in the operations space. And could I fill in for her for 3 months? So I got on a plane to London a couple of days later, and I kind of never left. So that's both how I moved to London from New York, and also kind of how I got into sales operations. So it was meant to be a 3-month project that really never ended.
Got it. So you were seconded to the client, I assume.
I was.
And you stayed with the client?
And eventually I said, it would be really great if we just paid me in pounds and I actually lived in London like a real person. And I really enjoyed what I was doing. So by the time it got to that point, it had been that this 3-month initial engagement had really kind of extended to 9 months. And so by that point, I kind of had a team of people that I had kind of pulled together that were kind of working in sales operations and essentially, was already kind of doing the job, which I really kind of enjoyed.
Got it. So you're like, by Accenture, I'm going to work with a client.
Yes, it's a little bit more complicated than that, the divorce process, but essentially, yes.
Okay, fair enough. And this was in 2007?
Yeah.
Got it. And then since then, I can approximately, I'm seeing your exposure to sales organizations probably ranks in 10 to 20 or even more, right?
Yeah. So I think in terms of kind of full-time roles, I've kind of, worked at 5 different organizations, and I've been, through my consulting business, able to kind of touch a number of other organizations. Some of them is very kind of short engagements, and some of those in kind of more depth. So really getting a feel for, how things work. Most of my kind of proper roles, if you will, full-time roles, have really been in the software and SaaS space. And so that's really where my expertise lies. But what I was able to do kind of through consulting was actually be exposed to a number of other industries, which has been fascinating. And I think some of the lessons that I've learned, I've kind of been able to bring back to software and SaaS. And as you look at different industries, there are things that they do really, really well, and things that you think, gosh, that's in the dark ages. So yeah, it's been quite interesting seeing just how different people do things.
Got it. And if we zoom in today onto Perkbox, so you're currently director of revenue operations. What is the approximate size of the sales organization? Well, actually, I assume you're spread across maybe marketing, sales, and support.
Yeah, so my role, I kind of work with marketing, sales, and the customer success organizations.
Cool.
And so we kind of consider those really our commercial, our kind of go-to-market audience. So, if you combine the audiences from kind of all three of them, I mean, it's well over half the company. In terms of kind of bag carrying, quota carrying salespeople, it's probably more like 40 to 50 people.
Got it, 40 to 50. And then how many people in the Rev Ops or the operations team that span those three areas?
Yep. So we've got 5 people. So we've got someone who looks after kind of top of the funnel in more of an operations space. We've got someone who looks after more bottom of the funnel and customer success, again, in the operations space. We've got 2 data analysts, and we also have someone working in enablement and kind of sales enablement. But for us, it's kind of just revenue, customer, and facing enablement.
Awesome. Zooming in on those 40 to 50 quota carriers, what's something that you've done recently that has, or not recently, but at some point since you've been there, about 8-9 months, that's boosted their productivity?
So one thing that was really important when I came in, I had a look, and it was really difficult for me to understand where things were in the pipeline. There were a number of different stages and things that I'd kind of go around and go, hey, what does the stage mean? And everyone go, no one knows. And so what was really tough was actually getting managers to coach reps and really knowing where their deals were, so how they could help them. And so whilst the project to kind of harmonize sales methodology and stages might not at the surface be connected to productivity, I think for them, it's let our managers have a much better view of where things are and how they can coach things and how they can kind of get rid of deals that aren't really moving and aren't really progressing, and really kind of, create the right coaching and feedback loop for things that can be kind of moved along. So for us, it's kind of led to a much cleaner pipeline, which I suppose in effect means that reps are working on less deals, but hopefully they're the good deals that we feel like we can win.
Got it. So did you actually change the different pipeline stages?
We did. We changed everything from kind of lead through opportunity. And most of them weren't kind of huge shifts. They were mostly around defining. So if you ask 5 different people and no one knows what this stage means, it's probably not that hard to change. The one thing that probably was the biggest shift is we kind of changed that line between where SDRs were handing off leads and where opportunities were created and kind of working on sales. And so when I came in, that was something that the balance was heavily skewed towards SDRs working quite late through the sales cycle. And what that meant is things were kind of sitting as leads for, more than half of our actual sales cycle, making it very hard to actually know where they were or how much they might be. And so that ownership over, if there's next steps, if it is an opportunity, that's firmly kind of sitting with a sales audience, with an AE. And so that kind of handover and where in the sales cycle that handover, that was probably the biggest change. The naming and the rest of it was probably the first step towards adding more rigor around that, but it probably wasn't a huge shift.
Got it. And so was there a rationale for having the SDRs so involved up until that late stage in the process, or had that just drifted over time?
I think it had drifted over time. It was actually really fascinating because I'd never seen anything like it. So, normally it's normal to kind of see sales of the quarterback, sales of the leaders, and It's clear that they're running things, and in that relationship between an SDR and sales is the more senior audience. What we were finding is actually the SDRs were the ones pushing sales to push things along. And if anything, they were most kind of driving these things up until the very last stages. And so we didn't want to take that away, because it's great that we had an audience that were, not throwing things over the fence and really kind of taking ownership and moving things along. But of course, the longer that they're moving things along, the less that they have to either find, new leads or find time to qualify different inbound leads. So I think, we didn't want to take that away from them, because they are a very kind of proactive audience. But yeah, the balance was probably unlike anything I'd ever seen.
Got it. And so when you made that change and I assume pushed that line back a bit, was there anything that you did to help smooth that process in, or help people get the reps and the SDRs bought into this new way of doing things? Do you have any tips around doing that?
So one of my kind of first exposures into kind of project management and things was kind of back at Accenture, and the project that brought me into sales ops. My role was around business readiness. And so it's probably the part of projects that most often gets missed. And business readiness is really kind of readying the business, readying people for change. And so part of that is communication and communication and communication. And part of that is training and documentation. Part of that is kind of support after the fact. And so even kind of making those big changes, it was the first time that I think Perkbox had really, especially in the commercial organization, had that kind of rigor of, here's what's coming. We've now rolled this out with some power users. We've tested it. We've got feedback. We've gone back. We've adjusted our training material. We've kind of come up with examples. We're doing this in a staging environment. We've got test scripts for people to run through, not test scripts, but more like, we're going to step through what you're going to do with a lead. So click here and do this. And, now in a deal, you click here and do this. And so we did a lot of prep in terms of not just telling people what was coming, but really walking them through the change. Whereas I think in the past, that probably would have been like an hour-long session, and here are the new things, and kind of, here you go, off to the races. And so I think, all these kinds of changes that people want to make in operations, and, they want to change Salesforce to do something or create a new process, all that stuff's actually quite easy. It's changing people that's hard. So trying to kind of make that as organized and professional and repeatable as possible. So
got it. I mean, that sounds like a classic like startup where previously some ops manager was just like pushing stuff through versus like an actual business change process that you can only, or the best place to learn those is at the large consulting companies, right? And so it seems like you brought that more structured, organized approach to a startup.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was new. And my team even, is that was kind of a very new thing for them. And I think what's been great is we've then been able to kind of take that approach to some other more recent projects that we've done. So something that we also did in Q4 was kind of roll out Inside View, which is really kind of a data provider for us around both account and contact information. So we had really limited firmographic information around our customer base, which meant that we weren't really good at knowing, where our sweet spot was, which also then makes it very difficult to know with our prospects who are kind of most likely to buy. So that same sort of approach of kind of, introducing that to a small number of people, getting some feedback, putting together some proper training sessions and follow-up sessions, monitoring the adoption, continuing to kind of communicate, doing all that rather than just, here's our training, happy days, and going on.
Got it. And while we're on that, what if the rest of the sales tech stack at Perkbox? So we have Inside View. I'm going to hazard a guess you guys are using Salesforce.
I'm a Salesforce junkie, never again with Dynamics. That's all I'll say. Which is not to say, I think HubSpot has as a really good place for quite small businesses starting out. And I think Salesforce can sometimes be a bit overkill, but outside of HubSpot and Salesforce, those are probably my two thumbs up. But yeah, we're a Salesforce shop. On the front end, in terms of marketing automation, we use Marketo. We also use Chili Piper to do some meeting bookings. We have an audience that use outreach. Most specifically, probably our outbound SDR team. I mentioned we use Inside View. For some of our account managers, we use a tool called Groove. There's a lot of things out there. It basically just does email and meeting tracking. So it's almost like a really quite simple version of doing that tracking. That's probably the main things. I'm sure I'll think of something afterwards, but that's kind of what our stack looks like.
Awesome.
And we use LinkedIn, of course.
Sales Navigator, of course. Yep. Okay, cool. The sales forecasting process, how is that currently working?
So, not well, if I'm honest, and certainly something that we're working to get better. So I mentioned, we worked on this effort that rolled out in October around introducing some new sales stages, which I think is working pretty well. We now have a pretty good idea of where things are in the sales cycle. What is still not great is some rigor around close dates. So we used to be a business that was very much inbound focused. And what that meant is a very short sales cycle from inquiry to close. As we're shifting to be both inbound and outbound, those sales cycles will elongate. And so it also means that we need better discipline about kind of our medium and long-term pipeline. So it used to be that it didn't really matter what the date was, it'll close in the next 2 months. So I think close dates is kind of the next kind of phase of where we are now, even in terms of trying to give some better predictive metrics or some better sanity checks. So the process right now is that on a weekly basis, managers are sitting down with reps and going through their list and coming up with a projection for where we'll finish in the month. We don't actually do anything beyond the month. So this quarter, we're shifting to both do monthly and quarterly forecasts. The dream is to be more long-term than that. Yeah. And I mean, I say not great. I say not great because from a sales ops perspective, it's not very scientific. But to give credit where credit is due, it's pretty accurate. We did some sales forecast accuracy reporting late last year. The guys were pretty good. I frankly don't know how. Maybe it was just a bit of luck. Certainly on our kind of SME business, it's very transactional. So as long as we're keeping an eye on activity, that should be actually pretty predictable. But even from our kind of mid-market corporate businesses, maybe it was a stroke of luck. But, they're really doing quite a manual deal by deal by deal with every single individual. And sometimes that can be quite a long list. So I think what we're trying to help them do this year is be a little bit less manual around that. So instead of having a Google sheet with a list of deals for this quarter, maybe it's a Salesforce report with some weighting, and then we kind of do some tweaks. So.
Got it. Awesome. And then over the 12 or so years exposure to sales metrics, if you had to only measure one for the rest of your sales ops career, which would you choose?
That is a very good question. I'm trying to think of an answer that doesn't actually have 8 parts, so I'm kind of cheating. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think for me, if you're going to look at kind of one thing, and I don't know if this is cheating or not, but I've always kind of worked at, separating out whatever that target is into a lead plan. And so whatever those kind of stages are, let's say that there's leads, opportunities created, and deals won, to make it very simple. Looking and monitoring those things on a weekly, monthly basis will give you a pretty good idea of where things are stuck and where things are going well or not. It's kind of combines some leading indicators with stuff at the top from some stuff that's happened. But if I had to kind of like look at one dashboard for the rest of my life, because I'm finding it very hard to kind of boil down to one metric. But I'd look at progress against our lean plan. So how many leads did it say I was meant to create this week? How many opportunities did it say I was meant to create this week? If we don't do that, then we're not going to deliver our February number. So for me, it would just be kind of monitoring that lead plan.
Got it. And so the dashboard you would want to see is for all reps, all SDRs, total number of leads, total number of opportunities over time. And so you can see how those numbers fluctuate, and that's going to give you a very good idea as to whether you're going to hit the forecast.
Well, I think for me, it's just like, what is that against target? So it's all well and nice to have a line graph saying these numbers are getting better or these numbers are getting worse. But I really want to know, kind of like, in January, I said I'd have this many leads and this many opportunities. And like, how are we tracking towards that? And did we hit that? It's for me, the trends are interesting. But hopefully if you've done your plan right, it's actually kind of that achievement versus target.
Got it. Awesome. And final question is, who have influenced you the most in your sales ops career?
I think it's been some of the really great sales leaders that I have either worked for or met through my networks. And I think there's a lot of kind of really inspirational people out there who have some really interesting ideas. There's some people who have really kind of seen it all. I think for me that the balance between sales management and kind of like sales ops is, to me, it's like a Batman and Robin relationship. So Batman's clearly the senior person, they're in charge, that's your kind of sales leader. But hopefully Robin and kind of sales ops, like, one, they can kind of fill in when Batman's not around. So forecast reviews don't really stop when a sales leader goes on holiday, much as sales reps would like to think otherwise. But they're also just kind of like, those second pair of eyes telling them to watch out for things that maybe aren't on their mind. So like, hey, watch out, there's a baddie behind you. Hey, we've totally stopped looking at multi-year deals and they've gone down the tubes. So I think for me, it's those really kind of great relationships and people who have really kind of elevated me because they've seen it as a very important role. So, I mean, I wouldn't say that we're equals, but people who have really kind of elevated me to say, hey, we can kind of both do this. I'm clearly in charge and you're helping me, but we're both two pieces of this puzzle that can accomplish more.
Got it. And do you have a specific name of one that really has, or have they all been really good?
One who I really enjoyed working with was Dick Cahill at Concentra, who's a really kind of seasoned sales leader who had a good idea of what he wanted and a good idea of kind of also being very open to kind of what else is there? Who else? Nigel Syrett, who I worked with at Reval, was a really great person to both have a lot of great ideas, but also, he was someone who, anytime he had an idea, he wouldn't do it without running it past me. And would this work? And how would this? And would there be any issues? And how could we report on it? And I think those people who have been kind of quite empowering as well have also allowed me to bounce my ideas off of them and kind of refine and get better.
Got it. And which kind of Batman was Dick Cahill? Was he the more Christian Bale type, or was he?
I don't know.
Awesome.
All the tricks.
That I do really like that analogy. Never heard that before. The Batman and Robin sales leadership / sales operations analogy. And shout out to Dick Cahill of Concentra for being the best Batman. Marissa, thank you so much for that. There are three things that I want to quickly highlight that I really liked. My favorite thing, I think, from the whole chat was your point about changing a process or changing something in operations is relatively easy. It's the people changing that's the hard part. I do agree that I think other SaaS companies, or especially early stage companies, can really benefit from some of the rigor of the change management that you obviously experienced at Accenture. And the final thing, with obviously the Batman and Robin analogy. So thank you so much for coming on. Before we do stop though, why would people in the audience want to come over to Sales Ops Help to check out what you're doing there?
So I think what I've done is tried to add a few blogs around some of the common questions I get. So things like, should my sales operations organization be on a commission goal, and kind of thoughts around that? Or what does change management look like? And what types of scale changes need a proper business readiness? And what actually should just be regular communication. So I've tried to take all those kind of common questions I get and distill them. I like to also blog about the things that kind of make me scratch my head, that the process almost forces me to think through it. So hopefully there's some easy advice there for everyone.
Awesome. We'll link down below this video to Sales Ops Help. Marissa, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a very insightful session. Thank you for your time.
Thanks so much, Tom.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Sales Ops Demystified podcast. If you are listening on a podcast listening application, then please subscribe, rate, and review. And if you have any questions about the show, if you know a guest, or if you have any questions about sales operations, just hit me up at tomhunt@ebster.com. That's tomhunt@ebster.com.